Why do most Christians not keep the Sabbath? And why are some Christians even opposed to it? My name is Melvin. Welcome to the final episode of the series, Sabbath Questions, in which we discuss 13 popular questions about whether the Sabbath is still relevant for us as Christians or not. Now, before we get into those two opening questions, the comment challenge. It's been inspiring to see your engagement in this whole series, and since this is the final episode, it's only appropriate to make this challenge. What has been your favorite thing about this series, Sabbath Questions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to see the comment section turn into a praise party for God. First, why do most Christians not keep the Sabbath? I think the main reason for that is simply they don't know they should. The vast majority of Christians go to church on Sunday, so to consider that there may be something wrong with that, that's not a natural wondering. And if they would hear about the Sabbath, whether they would read about it in the Bible, they would hear it from the pulpit, it would soon be accompanied with some argument for why it would not be for us anymore, why you can keep the Sabbath whenever you want. It's flexible, you can decide yourself. When my wife and I, when we were studying these things, the Sunday and Sabbath, we didn't know. We genuinely wanted to find truth. And one day my wife asked the senior pastor of the popular Sunday church that we were a part of at the time, she asked him about the Sabbath, and this pastor gets all upset and calling out, like, the Sabbath was for the Jews. Are you a Jew? Even though, of course, not all senior pastors would have this kind of emotional reaction, but still, the mainstream thought taught in the Christian world is that the Sabbath was for the Jews only, or that Jesus is now our Sabbath, or that Paul tells us, like, hey, you can decide for yourself if you want to keep the Sabbath or not. Basically, any of the questions that we have discussed in this series. So Christians keep being exposed to the idea that the Sabbath is not for them. And then they get to hear all those reasons for it. And then on top of that, they're getting indoctrinated with this idea that we as Christians living after Jesus, that we are to keep the Sunday. And I know those arguments very well because I intentionally studied these out with the purpose to get rid of the Sabbath. I grew up in a Sabbath-keeping church, but later I started frequently visiting Sunday-keeping churches, and at some point I even tried to convince my church to move the services from Saturday to Sunday. So I tried to convince them with these popular verses that back up the Sunday worship teaching. And I've already outlined a future series dedicated to those arguments and Bible verses to discuss that topic of Sunday worship. So with almost all of Christianity going to church on Sunday and being made to believe that the Sabbath is not relevant for us anymore, that Sunday is now the right day for us, that's why I believe that most Christians don't know the truth about the Sabbath. And that's exactly why it's so important that those who do know share it with others. Both because breaking the Sabbath commandment, it's sin. Whether you know about it or not, it's not something to take lightly. But also because the Sabbath is a gift from our Creator to us, and it would benefit our overall well-being, our mental, our physical, our spiritual health. And we want others to get to experience this divine blessing. But with some people, however, when sharing with them about the Sabbath, I notice a resistance. They don't want it to be true. They avoid it. They may even oppose it. And that's our second question in this episode. Why? Why do some oppose the Sabbath? I understand why. Having grown up with the Sabbath myself, I didn't like it. We went to church on Saturday, but more and more of my friends were staying at home. I thought the services were boring. It was the day in which I couldn't watch TV or play video games, and became a day of restrictions for me. And I can almost guarantee you that this is how those Christians view the Sabbath. A day of restrictions, bondage, don't do's. So to then tell those people that we ought to keep the Sabbath, that's like, oh no, I'm not going to like that. Let me see if there's a way out. I mean, that's what I did. And my bondage view of the Sabbath was part of the reason why I left my Sabbath-keeping church. Now, I came back after I met this girl who is now my wife, and she kept the Sabbath. And she initially made me come back, but only for a while, because within a year or so, I had convinced her to leave with me. And now the truth is, despite that we were then being a part of a Sunday-keeping church, she still didn't want to let go of this idea that there was something special about the Sabbath. I'll be honest, it annoyed me a lot at that time, but now I'm happy that she held on. When we read about the Sabbath in the Bible, it's often in a negative light. First of all, we in our Western 21st century mind, we typically don't really like laws. We want to be free and not have others tell us what to do and what we cannot do and all these things. And the Sabbath seems to be all about what we're not allowed to do. And I think the majority of instances in the Bible that shape our view of the Sabbath is caused by one group. That's the Pharisees. They were always on top of Jesus. Don't heal. Don't walk with that mat. Don't pick that corn. Don't do this. Don't do that. And in these Christians' mind that oppose the Sabbath, they represent the Sabbath keepers. Fixated on rules and judging and hypocritical mentality. But here comes Jesus, and he's more chill, and he clashes with this group and rebukes them and calls them hypocrites. To these Christians, Jesus is like the one who saves them and sets them free from that legalistic bondage. And it's true, he does, but not from the Sabbath itself. Jesus broke down the walls of all their human-made rules and traditions that had turned this Sabbath gift into an absolute legalistic burden. Because if you contemplate on the origins of the Sabbath, the true purpose, Jesus made it for us in creation week, according to his perfect design that he envisioned for our human family. Why would he include, in a world that's the exact replica of what he pictured in his mind, something to burden us? A day of bondage. Does that sound like something Jesus would do to us? Or is there something about the Sabbath that the Christian world might be missing? Jesus turned my life around in many ways. Lifestyle, diet, character, and the Sabbath experience. I used to hate the Sabbath, try to debunk it, fight against it, but now it's my favorite day of the week. I used to see it as a day of restrictions, but now I see it as a day of freedom and rest. I'm experiencing more and more the purpose behind the design, and it's truly enriching my life. Make sure to check out my second YouTube channel, where I make weekly videos about how I live as a Christian, different areas of the Christian life, marriage, fatherhood, personal development, health, and the Sabbath. You can find a link to my second channel in the description below. And just a fun final punchline when thinking about how can the majority be wrong, read the Bible and see, when was the majority ever right? For the last time in this series, remember, you don't just want to be a hearer of the word. You want to be a doer. And the best way for you to make this message your own, to really let it change your life, to act on it and be able to teach it to others, is to write down in your own words what you have learned. So comment below your summary of this episode. I'll choose one of them and I'll pin you. Thank you for watching this series. Subscribe to the channel with notifications on to not miss the next series when it comes out. Maranatha from Norway.